This is Alan Karpick, joined by Brian Neubert. Our Saturday Simulcast brought to you by the Purdue Union Club Hotel, the 811 restaurant, or 811 Bistro, I should say, Boiler Up Bar. And Brian, as we go into Memorial Day weekend, you've had a busy week talking mostly a lot of Purdue hoops. Had a chance to talk with Matt Painter. I want to get your impressions on just not only, it seems like a weekly conversation on the future of college sports, NIL, et cetera, but just your observation of your interview with Matt and where you think he's kind of coming from in this whole topsy-turvy world of college sports these days.
I think, he's a pragmatic guy. I think he understands that things will change around you from time to time, but if you just keep doing what you think is right, if you keep doing what you believe in, you keep doing the things that have gotten you where you've gotten, things will either work out for you or they won't. And I think he's, this is a very different game than what he signed up for, as it is for every coach in college basketball. These are issues that he's been at the forefront of because he sits on so many committees. He has such a platform in college basketball nowadays. I think he's still disgusted by the fact that the one-time transfer rule passed, not simply because it's a pain in his but because it's predatory toward the lower levels of college basketball. And I've always said about Matt Painter is he's a mid-major coach at heart. I think he's a high major coach and one of the more prominent coaches in his sport, but he carries himself like he's still the coach at Southern Illinois in a lot of ways. So I think he's, from a good of the game perspective, I think that's where he's been coming from with his opposition to the one-time transfer rule. I don't think it has anything to do with him, wanting to control players or anything like that, or any of the other repercussions that have come from this in terms of the tampering or the constant roster overhauls, the convergence of NIL, all that stuff. I think he cares about the game. And I think this is something that he doesn't think is good for the game. I think a lot of people would agree with him, but kind of is what it is at this point. From an NIL perspective, Purdue's not going to be Miami. Purdue's not going to do what nobody's supposed to be doing. Will that create the occasional competitive disadvantage? Of course it will. But I think Painter's emphasis here is that he wants, if anybody's going to get taken care of by this at Purdue, it's going to be the people who've accomplished something in the program, who've gone to class, who've worked hard in practice, kind of things like that. He's not going to use it to recruit. No one's supposed to be using it to recruit, but Purdue's definitely not going to use it to recruit. How that fits into the recruiting picture is simple. It's just, you just tell guys, you get here and you will have your opportunities. Coaches aren't supposed to facilitate anything. It's beyond vague from the NCAA what you can even say to recruits about it, but Purdue will tell guys, you come here and you get what you earn. I think NIL money is going to be treated much the same way playing time is. And that might seem old fashioned, but I think that falls in line with the way Painter has built this program, has tried to condition his rosters, things like that. And it's part of the general approach to the game and to team building and team management that has, been pretty successful over a relatively long period of time now.
At 51 years old, will be 52 in August, but Matt is an elder statesman, so to speak, of college basketball. He has a respect. He sits on, like he talked about, a lot of the committees. I thought it was interesting what he talked about when talking to Dave Emmert on that whole front. Mark Emmert, Dave Emmert. I know a Dave Emmert, not a Mark Emmert. I don't know Mark Emmert personally, but my point is that
former Dallas Cowboys running back Emmert Smith.
Yeah, that too. His almost pleading with them in a way about not only this whole process, but he said he was heard, but it didn't seem to get anywhere, and he seemed to be kind of not okay with it, but he's been able to reconcile that to some extent. I mean, what was your take on just his role as a high-level committee person and trying to affect or at least bring some reasonableness before this all went down and then after it's gone down as well?
Well, I don't know if I can really speak to his opinion, but I think that interview was as close to as I told you so as I think you can
Yeah.
possibly get, because I know he was extremely frustrated by the fact that he was presenting real world, borderline inevitable scenarios that were going to come out of this, that he wanted to get answers to from the people who ultimately were going to make these decisions. And he clearly was not satisfied with the answers he got, if he even got answers. I don't know. What I can tell you, this is me talking, this is not Matt Painter talking.
Understood.
If you go down and you look at like that NCAA Board of Governors roster, if you go and look through these committees, you've got decisions being made by like the AD at Binghamton, and you've got just these schools that like, now I just pulled that name out of a hat there. That's not necessarily real that it's the AD at Binghamton. I'm talking about that level of school. You've got these schools you've never heard of who sit on these influential committees within the NCAA, and it's faculty representatives, it's university presidents at schools that don't even have big time sports that are making decisions that are basically affecting the competitive landscape for people who operate in a very different world than the people who are making these decisions understand. And if I were, a college basketball coach or a college football coach at a high major or even a mid-major level, that would make me bang my head against the wall. That academics are basically setting policy and setting the competitive landscape for big time athletics. Now, obviously, we can talk all day about the separation between the academic sides of campuses and the athletic sides of campuses and things like that. But we can also say with relatively certainty that the two of them have never always seen perfectly eye to eye. They probably don't understand each other all that well, truth be told. And the fact that there are like ADs and presidents and faculty representatives from like the lowest levels of the NCAA that have a voice in what happens at the highest levels of the NCAA just doesn't make any sense. This should be coaches setting this stuff. This should be ADs, or this should be presidents acting on behalf of their ADs setting policy. And it should be people relevant to the results of these conversations that are making these decisions. That's just not reality. The fact of the matter is, for the NCAA, is this transfer thing came down because they were just trying to buy cheap PR. They were just trying to throw something to the athletes while they kept fighting the money thing. And nobody was asking for this. Nobody that I'm aware of this was not a groundswell of anything. This was, hey, let's give them this.
The transfer rule.
Yeah, the transfer portal. Nobody was demanding this. And their way of reverse engineering the explanation for it was basically that, oh, we're giving everyone immediate eligibility anyway because of this waiver process that is kind of a sham. But also, if baseball players transfer, they get to play right away. So why shouldn't everybody get to play right away? Well, I think we could talk all day about the absurdity of that comment. Like, okay, well then how come baseball players can't just, go somewhere else and sit for a year like men's basketball and women's basketball and football players and volleyball players do? It doesn't make any sense. It's just all this big shell game in terms of, the NCAA running from what's been coming down the pike for many years and happened to get forced down their throats right on top of them, making this unnecessary and destructive, quite frankly, concession to the athletes that, again, nobody was even asking for. I'm all for college players having, full access over their careers, but I'm also have been quick to point out over the span of many months that everybody benefits from a strong game. Everybody benefits from a healthy NCAA. Everybody benefits from a healthy men's and women's basketball, a healthy football, and graduation rates and academic stuff still matter. And the transfer thing has been a strike against, the academic priority that the NCAA has always put in its commercials, and simply the college experience for a lot of guys, because a lot of kids are going to make, and I'm not saying the NCAA has to make decisions for people, but a lot of guys and a lot of women are going to make decisions they're going to come to regret, and they're not going to make the most out of their college experience, and they won't realize it at the time, but they will realize it later. With the benefit of hindsight, I look back on my college career. I never transferred, but I look back at my college career and I think of all those Thursday nights at the chocolate shop, and I think of all the classes I couldn't get up to get to a 10:30 a.m. class and things like that. And I realized that, hey, I didn't maximize the college experience. And I think the fact that young people are leaving their first college on a whim solely for athletic reasons might seem like the right decision when you're young, but in the long run, providing that easy out, and every kid on a college campus has that right. So I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth here and say they should have control over their careers, but this wasn't the most beneficial thing. But what I'm saying is that everybody benefits from a strong NCAA, and this is the way it's been, for a long time. No one was asking for this, and it's just unfortunate that they threw this bone out there when there was nobody looking for this bone.
Yeah, you were talking about that well over a year ago. I did think Matt Painter's comments about not only the fact that graduation rates will suffer, and that the NCAA had really built up, especially people of color, to much higher graduation rates. And again, this could really impact that, because guys could transfer from place to place, and then ultimately, will they graduate? Will they ultimately do what I know there's a lot of cynics out there about the mission of all this, but Matt Painter at least makes you believe, and I think he's been pretty consistent, that that is part of the role. That's what we're supposed to be doing, we being college basketball programs, college sports programs, and that's building young men and women into something else when they're done, because 99% of them aren't going to play at the professional level. I mean, what was your take on his pretty candid viewpoint about the disappointment or his perceived disappointment of where graduation rates could go if this becomes as willy-nilly as it appears?
Yeah, I mean, it isn't just about graduation rates, but it's about all the kids who are going to trade degrees at, Michigan or Purdue or Indiana or Illinois or Vanderbilt or whatever for degrees from, some directional school somewhere, just because they're worried about, basketball or football. That it's just about playing. It's just about trying to get to the NFL. It's just about trying to get to the NBA. When at that stage of your life, a lot of people do not realize how hard it is to make the NBA, to make the NFL. On top of the fact that when you think about making the NFL, you also don't realize, well, my best case scenario is probably maybe I play 6-7 years in the NFL, even in the best case scenario. Well, that leaves another 50 years on earth for most people. So there's still life after sports. And I know it sounds preachy and whatnot to, be talking that way, but that's the reality of it. And I'm not saying the NCAA has to protect kids from themselves, but I think that this was just an unnecessary move that is going to come with some of these repercussions. I go back to Nigel Easter, to kind of put a face on it. Like, he left Purdue after 3 years in the program. I don't know how close he was to his degree. I think it would have taken him a couple more semesters. He left for 100% basketball reasons that kind of remain unclear. Never played another college basketball game. Obviously hasn't gone on to play professionally. It's my understanding he's hurt. I would imagine at some point in time he gets a phone call from Purdue University saying, okay, no, Joe, come back in and finish up your degree. But the reality is that that's your cautionary tale. I mean, this was a guy who was, he obviously was a polarizing college basketball player among the fans of the school he played for, but he did some really good things on the basketball floor, and he was a good player. And he left with very little to show for it. And I'm not saying it's the NCAA's role to have to protect kids from themselves. But I'm just kind of lamenting all of the collateral damage that'll come from this unnecessary move that, again, no one was asking for. Like if NCAA athletes were pouring into the streets demanding immediate eligibility for transfers, okay, but nobody was asking for this. They just did it to try to throw Congress a bone so that Congress wouldn't come down on the pay for play thing. And as it turned out, state governments jumped them on the NIL thing. And so transfer reform and NIL came on top of one another. COVID came on top of that. And this has been the equivalent of like crossing the streams in Ghostbusters, you know?
Yeah.
I think I've used that before.
Well, yeah, you have. That's okay.
I got to get some new material.
Yeah, no Joe Easton would have left Purdue as a captain in his senior year. Would have, it goes on and on about what the unfortunate part of that part, and he is a good case in point. All right, you also this week had a chance to talk to some of the incoming freshmen that will be starting summer school in about a week, I believe, in the first week of June. Just your impressions of talking to those guys and anything that jumps off the page about personalities, thoughts, and what you gleaned when the opportunity to speak with these young basketball players as they head into the 2022-23 season.
Not really. Good, solid people. I think they're all good players. I personally think this is more of kind of like a complimentary class than it is. I don't know if there's any NBA guys in this class. I don't know if there's any like stars in this class, although I think that I think Fletcher Lawyer's got a little something to him. But I think they're good, stable people. From Purdue's perspective, I would like the fact that Braden Smith grew up around basketball. He grew up in a household full of coaches. Fletcher Lawyer grew up in a house full of coaches. And I think that that's beneficial. And I'm not saying that that's not beneficial. That's not something, I'm not saying that that's detrimental to like Camden Heide and Will Berg. I think Will Berg has some basketball in his family too. I'm not sure about that. I can't remember what he said when I asked that, but I think the two guys right away for Purdue can help them next season, or may have to help them next season, are Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer. And I think those guys, growing up around basketball, being wired the way they're wired, I think they're kind of naturally predisposed to making the transition to college basketball maybe a little bit smoother. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It's going to be really hard. But I think that it makes it a little easier for those guys. I think Braden Smith's tenacity and his just overt competitiveness, I think will serve him well in college, and I think can make an impact for Purdue over the course of his career. I think Fletcher Lawyer's calmness, his sort of icy cold demeanor, for lack of a better term, I think is something that will suit him well. He's a pretty unflappable sort of guy, and he's going to need to be when he's the 160-pound kid running off screens against Wisconsin and Michigan State, and they're trying to punch him in the kidneys. Yeah. But I think those guys are pretty well wired for this. I think all these guys have good personalities. I think they're solid people. I think they're, from everything I've gathered, they're workers. I think they'll fit well into Purdue's culture. But it is a big jump from one level to the next. And, a lot of these guys got to get healthy. Braden Smith's got to get his foot right. Camden Heide missed most of his year at prep school because of a foot issue. He's now fully cleared, but, you probably still want to be careful with him. Will Berg had foot issues too. This is the year of the foot issue. Yeah. For Purdue basketball. It's been unbelievable. It's just kind of one of those things that are like a Stephen King novel. Everyone breaks their foot at the same time, but I don't really know what else to say here, but I think those guys can play roles for Purdue right away, specifically Smith and Lawyer above all others. And Heide and Berg will kind of see what they got when they get here and, things like that. But I think this is a good program class. I think this is a good complementary class, and it'll be important for Purdue to put them around some studs. And I think in 2023, Purdue's got a chance to get some studs.
Yeah. Last, when talk a little bit, you got a chance to do a couple of your exit interviews. One with Sasha Stefanovic earlier, and then Eric Hunter. Interesting, just because I thought you handled it well. Not that there's anything bad going on, but it is different. The fact that Eric Hunter is going to be at Butler next year, that may take some getting used to. And he chose to play another year, where Sasha Stefanovic could have played another year and actually had been a 6th year in college. Impressions there in terms of, Eric Hunter seemed to be quite content and has no reason not to be with what he accomplished at Purdue, and seems to be looking forward to what's next. That should be a new thing, being in his hometown of Indianapolis. But any other overriding impressions, at least of those two, and as they say farewell to their time at Purdue?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think I could have done a much better job with the Eric Hunter interview, but outside of that, I think those guys experienced a lot of things at Purdue. I think they both probably leave with some regrets, but also a hell of a lot of memories. I mean, they played with great players. They played on really good teams. They came within an eyelash of the Final Four. They played on a team that got to #1 nationally. A lot to be proud of. But, at the same time, I think, both of them viewed kind of the end of their careers differently. I think Eric Hunter probably got done and, realized, oh, hey, college basketball is fun, or if I want to play professionally, which he does, and I don't think that's unrealistic for him, from an overseas perspective, maybe trying to work his way up through the grassroots level, but maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to go somewhere and perhaps show a little bit of a different skill set than he did at Purdue. I think he probably would have come back to Purdue had Purdue, twisted his arm once he expressed interest in playing another year of college basketball, but that wasn't to be. And, I think Butler will put him in some different positions than Purdue did. I doubt that Butler is going to have a 7'4", 300-pound guy where the guards are going to have to throw the ball into. So hopefully for Eric Hunter's sake, he's going to get some more opportunities to show a little bit more scoring wise than, he necessarily needed to do at Purdue. Sasha Stefanovic, I think, it was his time. I mean, I think that, after 5 years in college, 2 degrees later, you've done pretty much what you're going to do as a player. Obviously they could have done a little more as a team this past year, but there were no guarantees coming back would have meant that. I think he was just ready, and you can't blame him. I mean, it's when you're 23 years old, there comes that point in time too where you can't be Rodney Dangerfield back to school doing the triple Lindy off the off the top platform here.
You're getting them all into that. That's another good one.
I think these guys, I think these guys leave with some, I got the sense at the end of the year that a lot of these guys were ready, ready to be done. I don't think this year was a lot of fun for a lot of people. There was this weight, that followed everything that happened with this year. And it was just this year-long panic attack. And I think it wore on guys. And I'm not necessarily saying that's the reason they didn't have the ultimate outcome that they needed. That's not the reason they turned the ball over too much. That's not the reason this team wasn't any good on defense until half the year had passed. And even then, still not great. But I think that takes a toll on guys. And I think, this was a different kind of year for Purdue. And I don't think guys enjoyed it as much as they should have. And that's just my impression from afar. I mean, it's been suggested to me. I've observed it. But I think there was a component to this season where when they, lost that game to St. Peter's, there was maybe a little bit of a deep breath afterwards where that sucked. That really sucked for this year to end that way. I mean, it sure did. But at the same time, it wasn't all that long after that game ended that, some guys were like, that sort of thing. I don't want that to sound the wrong way. Like they rolled over in the NCAA tournament, because they did not. I mean, look how they played the first week of the NCAA tournament. But I think there was just this weight hanging over their head all year long. And it showed up, that's what made the Wisconsin game at the end of the regular season so gutting, was that, Purdue stacked up. Purdue didn't, fritter that game away the way they did Rutgers and Indiana and Michigan, especially Michigan State. Purdue was right there at the end. They rallied from however many points down that was on the road. They really showed something. And then to lose the way they lost, I just think that was a fork in the eye socket. Trying to get as graphic as I can here.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
So I just think that, this was a hard year on a lot of people. This was a harder year than it should have been, because this should have been a blast. But it is what it is. Those guys are ready to move on. I don't know if I'll get Travion Williams for his exit interview. Once these guys go and start training for the NBA, it's like they move to Saturn sometimes. So I'm not sure I'll be able to get him. I would love to get him, but I was hoping that at the NBA Combine, like, the media people would kind of get bored with it quickly and go away, and I'd have 5 minutes, just me and him, but it didn't work that way. So that's what I got.
All right, last question. Memorial Day weekend. When growing up, you grew up in New Jersey, so you could have watched the Indy 500 live, like all those of us that grew up in Indiana couldn't. Did you? What were your Memorial Day weekends like? Were you a big grilling family? Did you go to the Jersey Shore? What did you do growing up on Memorial Day weekend, or did you read books? Tell us what it was.
Point Pleasant, New Jersey.
Yeah.
I spent my summers in Point Pleasant, roaming the boardwalk like a creepy little kid, hanging out on the beach, watching fireworks on the weekend of the 4th, off a barge that a gangster had actually commissioned out to show up the city. So, but Memorial Day weekend, I'm not a car racing guy. I remember the race being on TV and me just click. I'm still not a car racing guy. I'm still not an Indiana native in my mind. A lot of stuff about Indiana culture and whatnot hasn't quite taken yet. And it's been 25 years, so chances are
may not take.
Chances are it's not going to take, but I respect everyone's admiration for the movie Hoosiers, which I've never seen.
Wow.
Which people cannot believe when I say that. And I respect everyone's passion.
I've only seen it once, so I
for the
haven't seen
500.
Yeah.
But
you've never been to the 500, right? You said?
No,
okay.
No.
Yeah.
Nor does the thought of an afternoon outside in the beating sun in close proximity to blacktop with exhaust. I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it's a good time. I'm sure it's an experience, but not really my thing. Kind of a sensory sort of issue for me there. I don't want to sit in the sun that long.
There's a lot of it's
loud noises and vibrant smells, and it seems like the sort of thing that would paralyze me. But
all it is 800 left turns. Though it is, I'll say this: I've only been 4 or 5 times, and I grew up 60 miles from the track. It is interesting, though. It is an amazing start when you watch them come around, but I get that it is loud and not always very comfortable, but it is an Indiana tradition, and they're going to run it again this year, whether you and I watch or not. So come Sunday. So that part, and I couldn't tell you even who would be the favorite, but it will be what it'll be on that front. So
I should also add that I quit drinking years ago. So a lot of the stories I hear about people's experience at the 500 involve beer, and being the one person not partaking, as part of all the festivities, probably would take something off of it. Be like going to a Jimmy Buffett concert and eating Altoids.
Yeah. But you can go to a Springsteen concert and not drink, because that's serious business. Right? Yeah. Okay. I agree with you on that. I agree on that. All right. That's our up close and personal for the week, Brian. Have a good week. We always appreciate your viewpoint and a lot to say on Purdue basketball. We'll be back next week. Tom Dienhart will join, talk some football for our Saturday simulcast, and stay tuned to the site for a lot of stuff this week. So have a great week, everybody. I want to thank our sponsor, the Purdue Union Club Hotel, 811 Bistro Restaurant, and Boiler Up Bar And of course, we look forward to, hopefully everybody will have a safe holiday weekend, and we'll look forward to more of the same next week as we make our way through the late spring into summer. But thanks to all for you for watching and listening, and have a great week, everybody.